if we cuddle up, we'll be warmer. It's an old Eskimo trick. So come on in, from old Eskimos. I know. We're going to do this. Okay, thank you. Everyone wants the rabbi to know. I know. Okay, good evening. It's lovely to have you here. Good evening, welcome. This is Valley Beth Shalom College of Jewish Studies, where we offer university-level learning without quizzes, sororities, or football teams. This year, we're learning personal theology. What does it mean to embrace a belief in God? What difference does that make, and how does that change the way one lives and works in the world? And tonight, our guest will be Rabbi Susan Goldberg, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. We will continue next week, same time Wednesday, 7 o'clock. We only have 2 sessions left, and then you have to take the final exam. So next week, our guest will be Rabbi Nomi Levy, who's an author and rabbi here in Los Angeles. And then our closing week will be the week after, and our guest will be Rabbi Eli Spitz. And I'll introduce them when they come. They're wonderful, wonderful teachers, so please come and share that with us. A couple of other announcements of things going on in the community. Tomorrow night, we'll gather once again for our annual Amato lecture. This is the lecture that we share with the CSUN, California State University at Northridge Department of Jewish Studies. And this year, we're going to be speaking about the justice and injustice of current immigration. If you listened to the president's speech last night, you have some sense of why that's a topical and timely issue. And I'd like to welcome Professor Jody Myers, who's going to be telling us a bit about tomorrow night's talk.
Thank you. So I know you all love coming here, and so you've been coming every Wednesday night. So here's a Thursday opportunity tomorrow. And even though this is sponsored by university, you also don't have to make tests. We have an endowment from the Amato Family Foundation to do an annual lecture on Jewish ethics. That's, ethical issues that are pertinent to the public. And our professor, Jennifer Thompson, who's an Amato professor of Jewish ethics and civic engagement, chooses the speaker every year. If you've been to our talks, they're all really excellent, and we're really grateful to VBS for helping host it every year, because you have this lovely chapel and a congregation of people that like to listen to talks. She will be, our speaker tomorrow night is a professor of philosophy from Simpson College in Iowa, Allison Wolf, and she's speaking about immigration justice and injustice, why Jews should care. So when we have these talks, it's not simply a lecture. There's also, it's back and forth, it's discussion, it's engagement. And this lecture meets a little bit later. It's at 7:30. Starting time is 7:30 tomorrow night. You are all invited to come. You're going to see students here and some faculty as well. So please join us. Thank you.
As well. So tomorrow night, the Amato lecture at 7 o'clock, 7:30. You're all invited, and we'd love to have you back. On Friday night, we have our musical service, the Rimonim service. It begins at 6:30. If you sneak in at 6, there's a wonderful light dinner that's served to everyone. But at 6:30, a beautiful musical service to welcome the Shabbat, and everyone is invited to that. Shabbos morning, we do Torah study at 9 o'clock. And then we have a special service that morning. We're going to be welcoming Israel's new interim consul general. His name is Eitan Naeh, lovely, lovely gentleman. He is Israel's appointed ambassador to Turkey. And he was serving as the ambassador to Turkey until the Turkish government had a rift with Israel and decided to toss the ambassador out of the country. And if you go online, you can see the video. They literally tossed him out of the country. So he went back to Israel for a few weeks where he thought he was going to have a quiet retirement. And they told him that the consul general in LA had just left and they needed someone to take his place. So they sent Ambassador Naed to be here. He's a lovely man. Before he was an ambassador, before the Foreign Service, he was a shaliach for the Sochnut. He was a Jewish educator, bringing Jewish education to the communities around the world. He then entered the Foreign Service. He worked in Chicago and in London. He was Israel's ambassador to Azerbaijan and Israel's ambassador now to Turkey, and he'll be with us for a year. And he's going to be our guest on Shabbos morning. He's going to be speaking at the end of the service at about 11:30. Then we'll break for a short lunch, and we'll come back and have a chance to converse with him and ask him some questions about Israel's current situation in the world, Israel with Iran, Israel with Syria, Israel with America, American foreign policy in Israel. Interesting questions. He's a man who really lives in the midst of Israel's diplomatic situation. So please join us Shabbos morning. We'll study Torah at 9, and then we'll come into the sanctuary. We'll listen to davening, and after services, Ambassador Naeh on Shabbos morning. And then, of course, next week, once again, after President's Day, which is on Monday, come back on Wednesday night and join us once again for College of Jewish Studies. I think that's almost all the announcements, except for one more. We are, as any great synagogue, are blessed with wonderful, wonderful volunteers who give their time and effort, and the College of Jewish Studies is certainly blessed. And among our wonderful, wonderful volunteers is the energetic and always energetic Billy Kabacher. And Bill celebrates his birthday on Friday, right? Is this a big one? At our age, they're all big, right? So let's wish Billy a happy birthday. Yom Huledet Sameach, Yom Huledet Sameach, Yom Huledet Sameach. Happy birthday to Bill. Happy birthday, Bill. Many, many, many good blessings. Yes, Mrs. Spitzer, another one of our great volunteers. Yes. We have a whole bunch of programs coming about Israel on 27th, right? Wednesday night, the 27th? Israel Aid. Right after this, Israel Aid is coming to VBS. Israel Aid is the branch of Israel's, it's not quite governmental, but close, that they send across the world whenever there's a disaster. So when there's an earthquake in the Philippines or a flood in Indonesia or, issues, even issues here in the United States, when you hear about Israeli rescue workers coming to save lives, it's Israel Aid that's coming. They're coming to VBS to tell us about their work. It'll be Wednesday night, February 27th, and everyone's invited to come in to celebrate that aspect of Israel's life. How's that? There you go. Good. They fought fires in California. They fought earthquakes all over the world, in Peru and in Mexico. These are, what? Who won? These are remarkable. Norm, these are people even you're going to kvel about. These are really, really good, selfless people, and they represent the best of Israel and the best of the Jewish people. So come enjoy that. It's starting to warm up. You feel it? Good. Let's hope it keeps warming up. Everyone stand up. Turn to the folks beside you and wish them welcome and hello and glad you're here. And now, as is our custom, put your arms around those people, draw them close, and we give thanks to God for the chance to learn together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Before you sit down, everybody turn around and wave at the camera and say good evening to all of our friends who are at home watching tonight on live stream, and everyone will be watching the recording of this lecture in the weeks to come. Good evening, welcome, we're glad you're here. Please have a seat. Those of you who opened the front door and realized that the weather had dropped to a frigid 67 degrees and said, to hell with it, I'm not going out. It's a night not fit nor man nor beast. I'm staying home. I'll watch Rabbi Goldberg on TV. So welcome, we're glad you're here. It really isn't all that cold. It's nice and warm in here. Please come, take a seat. We have been enjoying some wonderful conversations with religious leaders, Christian and Jewish, about their personal beliefs in God and the way that God shapes their lives. And tonight it's a real joy to welcome Rabbi Susan Goldberg. Rabbi Goldberg is a product of Los Angeles. She grew up on the East Side. Anyone here from the east side of LA? Anyone, other east siders? Where is it? Silver Lake, Echo Park, Boyle Heights, there you go. Right, well, what happened was, this was a great Jewish neighborhood. It was a great middle-class neighborhood, and then it went away for a while, and then slowly it's come back, and now it is the funkiest place in town to live. And Susan is well known as the rabbi of the east side of LA. She was ordained at the Academy of Jewish Religion in Los Angeles, now works for Wilshire Boulevard Temple, developing their programs on the east side of LA, and will soon be working there full-time, a freelance rabbi in that community. She's well known in the community for her enormous energy and her commitment, deep commitment to social justice as an expression of the deepest traditions of the Jewish people, and it's a real honor to have her here. Welcome, Rabbi Susan Goldberg. All yours. All yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be with all of you tonight, and I'm honored to be asked. I've said that a couple times, but it's true.
We used to have a microphone system that you had to do that to, and then we spent $40,000. So watch this.
That's okay? You can still hear?
That works even better.
Wait, he just said he couldn't hear.
You want to pay another $40,000?
You can hear, yes? Yes, great, wonderful. I'm honored to be with all of you tonight, and what a topic. So delicious, so wonderful. Not often that I get asked that, and you would think it would be more often, and it's really a centerpiece of my rabbinate, spiritual Judaism, and talking openly, freely, deeply, and with great heart about our relationship with the divine. In a tradition like Judaism, where we have multiple theologies, part of what happens is that invitation upon us to create our own theology within the context of Jewish theologies. I wonder if at the end of this process, all of you will share with each other, after all these weeks of learning, how your theology has changed or grown or stayed exactly the same as it did before this process started. But that would be an invitation at the end of these weeks of having people share with you their own theology, that you would have an opportunity to say what yours is as well. And perhaps during the course of the night, you'll be able to share some of that in the questions. I would love to hear it. So for me, with such a vast topic, it's nice to find a place to enter into. So I want to start with the beginning. And I'm going to be talking tonight about this idea of the divine as hamakom, as the place. So in Breshit, you have these little handouts. And those of you who are watching at home, we are looking at the first verses of Breshit, the first verses of Genesis. So if you have it at home, you can open that up. So in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Now the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. V'choshech al panei tehom. That's going to be an important moment for us, so hold on to that. And the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So there is much, this is a very well-known passage, but I want to go back to this panei tehom idea, this idea of the face of the waters. If you turn a little bit to the side, you get a piece of Aviva Zornberg's text on the murmuring deep. I'm going to talk about it, so you can refer later if you want to these pages, but I'll share with you my experience of both reading the whole book and then having the opportunity of sitting with her as she gave a talk on it and taking it in that way. Are all of you familiar with Aviva Zornberg? Oh, really beautiful writing. Beautiful writing. She's out of Israel, And she comes sometimes, not as often as I would like, to Los Angeles. But she has a very psycho-spiritual read, a philosophical read. She draws on all kinds of, and is deeply centered in traditional texts, and then does these beautiful discursive journeys. So if you haven't read her, she does a commentary on Genesis, the beginning of desire, on Exodus, the particulars of rapture. And then she does these books now that move all over Torah, and The Murmuring Deep is one of these books. So this is the beginning of where she begins in The Murmuring Deep. So her take on this idea of the murmuring deep, the Panei Tehom, is this, that in the beginnings, we know that something came, that there was something of which the beginning came from. Yes? And usually we connect to let there be light as that opening, right? And if you go a step back, maybe you're already comfortable going, well, there was silence before there was let there be light, right? So silence, then word. And she says, let's step back another step and say that before there was silence, there is the murmuring, the sound of the deep, which she expresses in this idea of Tehom. This, she says, it's this murmuring deep, this humming, murmuring, cooing, groaning, tumult, music, restlessness, stirring, that there's this sound like a whisper or a groan, these universal sounds that happen before there is silence and then word. And those sounds, she talks about the universal noises that people make when they weep, when they moan in pain, when they have an orgasm. No matter where you are in the world, there are these sounds. And that those sounds come before silence and then before word. The murmuring deep. I'm an artist, and I work with a lot of artists. I was a choreographer, I was sharing. Before I became a rabbi, a lot of the work that I do is working with Jewish artists on creating pieces of work and relating it to our text and traditions. And this idea of the place before the forming begins is very true when you do artistic work. The place before the silence, before even the idea comes. And I'm using this word place because what Aviva Zornberg does here is creates an opening, a new place of the divine in the creating. So that's one text. This murmuring deep, a place that becomes before the space of silence and then before word. In my own personal theology, there is space, there is place, there is hamakom, there is a space inside that makes room for the divine. My experience of my connection with God is an intimate encounter that is transcendent. So immanent that it's transcendent, that it transcends, and so transcendent that again it becomes immanent again. And that there is a way through spiritual practice, through prayer, through study, through narrative, through the midrash, that we open to this place, to hamakom, that allows for God to enter into us, enter into me. And that it's an active cultivation that allows that to happen. Many people come and sit with me and say, oh, Rabbi, I didn't really have very spiritual experiences, but then I had this moment where I looked out at the Grand Canyon, or I saw my spouse, give birth to our baby. And then there was this opening, and I had all of a sudden an experience of the divine. I opened up in awe to what was around me, right? When Heschel talks about the radical amazement. It's available all the time. I don't believe that there are only certain moments in which the divine presence is available to us. The divine presence is always available to us. But we open to this place more when we have these encounters, sometimes ones that just knock us down, and they're not always good. Sometimes the encounters that open us to the divine are moments of deep grief, or panic, or a crisis of health, or a loss. That these moments open us even more deeply to the presence of Hamakom, of the place. And when I say place, that's literally what I mean, that there's a place inside that opens to the divine. When Yaakov is in the place where he sleeps and lays his head, where the angels go up and down, very clearly it's Hamakom there, because this begins the discursive journey that the rabbis take to elevate the idea of Hamakom, of the place. But he makes that statement, right? God's everywhere. And I didn't know it. That is part of what is our invitation, that God is everywhere, right? Where is God? Wherever you let God in. But that's not just an intellectual idea, it's a spiritual cultivation. And one of the things that's very important in my rabbinate is the invitation and the offering of practices so that we can actually make room for the divine inside of ourselves. Because I think that many people go, oh, well, you're more spiritual. You have those experiences. Some people get to have them and some people don't. I do not think that that is true. I think a spiritual experience, connection to God, connection to the divine, utterly open to everyone. But it does take cultivation, unless if you can identify yourself as one of those people who just constantly are feeling the presence of divine in every minute, then I'd be blessed to meet you and hear how that happened for you. But for most of us, it's about cultivation of that place. If you turn your paper over, we're going to go on a little journey here. This is a text from Genesis chapter 24, verses 3 through 9. And it's a part of the series of chapters that's about the encounter at Sinai, yes? It's some chapters later, though, from where we receive the Ten Commandments. And it's a fascinating order because we are given the commandments, but this is the ritual of receiving that doesn't happen for some time later. And in fact, Rashi, our Torah commentator, early medieval, was concerned about the order of where this was placed. Because it seems like this ritual of receiving the instruction should have happened sooner at the mountain. Not after the commandments came down and then there's more instruction. And because this is in Mishpatim. Why didn't it happen previous? So this is one of those times where Rashi puts out that the Torah is not in chronological order. I love that idea because I love thinking about my life as not necessarily in chronological order, right? Sometimes we experience something and then we go, oh, right, that happened before that. Now I understand why this is happening to me, because that thing that happened later was supposed to, happen before. So this is one of those moments where Rashi says Torah is not in chronological order because the people must have gone through this sooner. Whether or not it is, it's not actually important to what I'm about to share with you. But this is one of those moments. So in this, it's also a very famous, well-known moment where the people receive Torah in here and they respond back. Na'aseh v'nishma, right? We will do and we will understand. Right? We will do and we will hear. We will do and we will understand. So there's much discussion. Why would you say it that way? Why wouldn't you say, let me understand, and then I'll do it? So if you go down to the bottom, Emmanuel Levinas, you have not read his work, I strongly, a little pitch right here for reading his work too, really beautifully important philosopher. Emmanuel Levinas on this direct encounter with the divine, with the true. It can only be the relation with a person with another. The Torah is given in the light of a face. The epiphany of the other person is ipso facto my responsibility towards him. Seeing the other is already an obligation toward him. Already an obligation toward him, just in seeing you. A direct optics without the mediation of any idea can only be accomplished as ethics. Such knowledge is one in which its messenger is simultaneously the very message. Okay, so that's like, some of you might be going, what? Okay, so let's just break that down. The idea is that in the encounter at Sinai, just like in the encounter when two people see each other, way before I know your name, I don't know your story, I don't know your history, I know nothing about you, but I see you and I have an obligation to you as another human being. Immediately, we're face to face. I encounter you. Later, then, I might think, oh, how should I treat you and what's a kind way to be, right? What are all the rules that we get at Sinai? But what Levinas is saying is that the moment that there's the encounter at Sinai, even before the rules of Torah are given, that's the place of the divine encounter, and I'm already in. I'm already in with you. Transcendence is that place before the place. This is how it connects to that Breshit passage, right? How Aviva Zornberg goes back and says there's actually the moment before the moment. That's the same thing at Sinai. Then you'll tell me the rules. But just in encountering you, you'd see this most when a baby comes in the room. You see how people react to a baby when they see a baby come in the room, right? And everybody's like, oh, look at the baby. I'm full of love in my eyes and in my body, and my heart is open to you. And if you were to stumble, of course I'd grab for you. I'd jump at the chance to catch you. I don't want you to fall. And that's before there is the rule, when the baby falls, catch the baby so the baby does not hurt itself. What Levinas is saying is that there is an immediacy of our connection to another human being, and that is like the connection to the divine. Before we get the Torah and the instructions, it's transcendent already. We've had an encounter. Now let's get down to the rules about how to be a community together, which is the whole point of the journey through Midbar, is to become a community. But before any of that, I encounter the divine. I encounter another person. I see in you the divine. I wish we could look at each other like we look at babies. Could you imagine if everybody was walking around the world looking at each other with a sense of appreciation and love and openness to who you'll be in the world? I think that would be lovely. But we have stories. That's the part after the part of the baby, right? Oh, I have this idea of who you are. I'll make a judgment based on what you look like, and well, do I want to walk on the other side of the street from you, go far to you, get close to you, right? Here's the narrative and the rules. But that before that is hamakom, the place of the divine, where I'm immediately in it with you. And it's tangible, and it's real, and it's that place that's inside. What do we do in the Midbar as our first group assignment after the encounter? We build a makom. We build a place. We build a place, the Mishkan, to try and be a space for God's presence and energy, knowing that God is everywhere, but we have to intentionally create a space. Same process, I think, that each of us have to do inside of ourselves, that we have to intentionally create a space. We always read about the Mishkan usually around Super Bowl time. It is usually around Super Bowl time. I have major sports fanatics in our house, so certain Torah things are always connected to certain sporting events. And depending on where, now we did Super Bowl a little early, Mishkan's like next week, but anyway, it's near. But my son was small. I remember him watching football. Poor Jewish boy. He wants to be a quarterback, but we are never going to allow him to do that. We've spent the last year transferring him to being a pitcher. Now that he's in high school, he's going to pitch for his high school team, and he is not going to play football, so everybody can relax. We're not going to let him. But in any case, little kid watching football some years ago, and he said, "Mom, look at the wide receiver. He's just out there trying to get open." Like, yeah, I want to be a wide receiver. I want to get out there and try to get open, open to receive, hopefully with no large man slamming into me, tackle me. But that is the idea of the Mishkan, right? Not in itself, but to be something that we can work together so that we can create a space for God to enter into us, a space for God to be present in our communities, and a space for God to be open to inside of us. One of the ways that we do that is through tefillah, through prayer. One of the ways that we do that is through song. One of the ways that we do that is through dance. One of the ways we do that is through meditation. There are many, many, many ways to become wide receivers, to make a place for the place, a makom for hamakom inside of us. In the Birkat Hamazon, one of the beautiful little moments is when we pray for revach, which is widening. Right? We often talk about Mitzrayim and the narrowing, tsar, right? But we don't talk as much about revach, which is widening. So tracking inside of ourselves the experience that allow us to widen, to open to new experience, to new people, which I feel opening to experience and to people is part of the pathway that leads to the widening, to open for the divine. Because it's that amazement, it's that awe, it's that opening. Nobody really says, "Oh, that's so amazing." You just think of the physicality of what we do when we encounter one of these moments, right? When people get out to see the Grand Canyon, they usually are not shriveled in. It's usually one of these moments, right? Trying to take it all in at once. That's that experience that we can have when we're opening ourselves to the divine. Now, I said that it's also a difficult experience, so I want for you to hear that I'm not just saying that happens when things are all wonderful. That also happens when things are very challenging. I can share with you that in April, it will be 2 years that I walked into a doctor's office and heard the craziest thing I could ever imagine anybody saying to me, which is that I had a cancerous growth. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, some part of me is still in a universe where I'm spinning around that room. There was this very rare cancerous growth in front of my ear. And it began this journey of chemotherapy and radiation. I have 3 children. My youngest was 6 years old. At the time, her brothers were preteens. And I've been 1.5 years out of treatment, March 1st. Thank you. Thank you. I'll take it. I'll take it. I like all the goodness that brings. However, it was so hard, and it was an incredibly difficult journey, and one that, like never before, felt the widening and the opening to the presence of the divine. To the presence, to the kavod, to the presence. A weight. I love the word kavod because it has weight. And there was a weighty, tangible presence. Deeply so intimate, so imminent that it was transcendent, so transcendent that it was imminent. Remember, I always said it would be wonderful if everybody could look at a baby with the openness of the divine. Well, it was similar during these treatments going down to the basement. I know there's always people who've gone through cancer in a room, so some of you who've been through this know what I'm talking about. But Kaiser Sunset, you only go down to the basement of this particular building if you're going for radiation, right? So everybody would get off the elevator, and I would always have a moment, and I'd, in the elevator, say to us, we're the lucky ones. Let's take a moment, and now we're going to enter in. And the way that people were present with each other in that basement, you'd sit down, countless times, I would have a stranger come sit next to me, turn to me and say, how are you doing? And I would say, well, you know, I would give an honest answer, which is so rare, and they would often look at me and say, yeah, I don't feel good, or today I feel so scared, or I'm having a really good day. And it was this place of opening where there was no pretense. It was the place before the place before the rules of covering up and making nice. People were present, open. And every day when I lie down on the radiation table with this mask that would cover my face, and then it would get bolted in, and then the radiation would pass this way and then that way, and then I'd be done. I'd say each day as I lie down, they knew to give me this moment, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asali kol zorki. That you give me everything that I need. And that you don't give me what I don't need. That was part of that prayer. Give me the radiation right where I need it, and don't give me the radiation where I don't want it to go. And then the treatment would begin. Being held by prayer, opened by prayer, opened by meditation, opened by song, opened by music, and feeling held by the divine, held by a kavod, not by a human presence, not needing it to be in body form, but by the presence the energy, the makom, the place of the divine, holding me in that place. So it is from these journeys, from both the joyful journeys and from the scary and challenging places, that I know intimately that the presence of the divine can be felt, can be cultivated, and can be opened into even more than maybe we thought we could access before. I'm going to invite everybody to take a breath. I have one more piece that I want to share, but I want to see that, how are we on time? I'm okay? Okay. Then I will take a couple breaths. So here's one little practice that literally makes revach, widening, for us. So I want you to go ahead and take a breath that goes up and down. And another breath that literally moves up and down and up. Then I want to invite you to take a breath that moves side to side. You could use your hands if it helps to direct you. You can even put your hands on your rib cage if that helps, side to side. Nice. And then I want to invite you to take a breath that goes forward and back. Beautiful. So each of us as babies in our developmental movement made a preference about which way we breathe. So along this path, shake your head if you found one that was easier to do. Yes, it was easier maybe to breathe up and down. It was easier to breathe side to side. Or it was easier to breathe forward and back. We have a way that we are patterned in our breathing. But all kinds of possibilities open up if we try and breathe in new directions. So I want to invite you this time to try breathing up and down and forward and back at the same time. Up and down and forward and back. Beautiful. How about going forward and back and side to side? Now you wonder how the opera singers do it? How do they get such revach, such widening in their bodies that they can hold such air that takes them to the back balcony? That is because they are breathing up, down, forward, back, and side to side, all at the same time in a three-dimensional breath. Let's try. Try in one direction and then try and add all the others. Beautiful. That is literally making space inside of you, making more possibility inside of you by changing your breath. And if you were today going, wow, I don't even know how to take one breath. I have no idea what she's talking about. Well, then just start with that. That will be your homework. 2 minutes of breathing on purpose each day. If you're like, I could do that, okay, I want to play with finding new dimensions, up, down, side, side, forward, back. Anybody with pain in your body, your breath is usually restricted there. Just for funsies, last breath, put your hand on your back. And we're going to try and do the forward back breath, but we're actually going to go back. Breathe backwards and then forward. Go for it. Breathe into your back. Beautiful. So I don't like to give words of teaching without there being some embodied experience and some practice which allows us to cultivate these lofty ideas. It's wonderful to talk about theologies, but it's also about how do we practice and cultivate. And you may say to me, how does breathing different expand my relationship with God? All I would say is, na'aseh v'nishma, like do it and then you will understand. And I'm happy to hear about how that goes. The other place that's a self-practice, right? The other place that we open to the experience of the divine is in a relationship practice, and that is the practice of empathy. Empathy, much talked about, but not always fully experienced. Empathy is one of my primary spiritual practices that opens me to the experience of God. And the reason it does so is that empathy is the process of feeling into someone else's experience without judgment or an agenda. And it's a very rare spiritual experience for most people. Empathy is the spiritual experience of feeling felt, as Dr. Daniel Siegel says. That I, for a moment, feel into what you are feeling. So when I come home and I hear from a kid, oh, I am so angry at my teacher, and they did this test and they didn't tell us, and all of a sudden the test was today, and I can't believe that happened. So here's a choice. How did you not know the test was today? I don't think the teacher would have given you no warning. Okay. Not empathy. Or, that happened to me once. Can I tell you a story about how my teacher showed up with a test on me? That was a crazy experience for me. Also not empathy. Empathy is the experience of saying, oh, that sounds so frustrating. A lot of times you don't need a lot of words with empathy, just sounds. Oh, gosh. Oh. That is matching the experience of the other person. Right? That's empathy. I hear you and see. Now, maybe a little later, if I'm not giving empathy, I could say, oh, okay, can we go back and talk about, was there really no warning? But in the moment, first, it's about giving empathy without agenda and without judgment. And it's in that moment of empathy that there's another tangible experience of hamakom. That's another tangible place to experience the divine. When you align with another person on the level of their deepest feelings without judgment or agenda. Do you have to stay in empathy forever? No way. Can you argue with somebody about what you believe and think and feel? Of course. But the first step of empathy so that we truly understand what they're going through before we have other things to say, that's where everybody gets missed. It's like an epidemic of missed empathy in our country. Politically, personally, in relationships. It's very rare, especially for people who've been together forever, spouses, kids and parents, to have these moments where all you do without judgment or agenda is be with the other person's feeling right where it is. My husband and I have a 5-minute empathy practice when somebody needs it. That's one of our spiritual practices we do together. Crazy, crazy times, I need 5 minutes of empathy. Can't give it right now? Okay, let's make a time. So I need it. It also helps in the moment where you're saying something and they're like, let me give you some advice. Actually, that's not what I need empathy. And if you give me 10 seconds of empathy, then we could do an hour of problem solving. But what everybody misses is that 10 seconds of empathy. Lead with empathy first, and the presence of the divine opens in a way that is remarkable to our relationships, our interpersonal relationships. Lead with empathy. You might be saying, I have absolutely no idea how to do that. So that's a practice to cultivate. Wonderful way to do that is this beautiful practice called nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg, something you can look up, but it helps us to cultivate empathy. You can try not talking and just, Sometimes the best thing we could do is not speak, especially when we hear the judgment coming. I want to tell you how wrong you are right now. Probably a good idea not to open your mouth. It is one of the midot, silence. Right? Knowing when to not talk. And if we can't give empathy, knowing that we need to wait a minute. Right? So there's spiritual practices we do for our own selves to make more room for the divine. And then this practice of empathy is the interpersonal spiritual practice that makes more room for the divine. Yes. Okay. I think I'm going to wrap there and open for questions. Thank you. Oh, your questions. You get questions first.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So we have a practice here at VBS. It's called nonviolent brownies. And we make room for God by making ourselves expansive. So what we're going to do now is take 5. We're going to have a little coffee, some brownies, some cookies, some conversation, and then come back here. We have many, many questions and conversation to have with Rabbi Goldberg. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, and thank you all. So everybody take a moment, get up, stretch, have a coffee, have a cookie, have a half a dozen brownies, and we'll come back and continue our conversation. I'm not going to start, don't worry. Happy birthday. Good, well, I'll let you have a chance now. 1, 2, 3, 4. I get no kick from champagne. Didn't you hear that? Okay. The speakers are set so we can't hear. There's no monitor on the stage. I need a monitor back here. I ordered one, actually.
Yeah.
Everybody come have a seat. We'd like to continue our conversation with Rabbi Goldberg. So grab a brownie, grab some Danish, come on in, and a coffee. We have many things to discuss. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum, bum, bum.
Very sweet of you. Yes.
We want you to be happy. I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. Y'all going to give your love to me. Cantor, good morning. It was the wrong text. It should be Exodus 24.
Oh!
It turned out to be Genesis 24. It should have been Exodus 24.
It should have been Exodus 24.
Yeah, it's the wrong one. I went looking for a chumash to tell you that, but it's Exodus 24.
I didn't put
All
the
right, good
handout
evening, everyone.
together.
Please come have a seat.
Thank you for pointing that out. We should tell everybody. I didn't put the handout together and then I didn't check it. That was my bad.
Okay. Wow, good evening. Everybody well? I want to thank Rabbi Goldberg for your very lovely conversation. And I'm going to begin, when we were in rabbi school, they told us never begin with an apology, but I'm allowed to break that rule once in a while. So I'm going to begin with an apology. And the apology is, I want to ask some really stupid questions. Okay. Because you have a beautiful, poetic, transcendent way of speaking, and I'm a simple-minded country rabbi. And I have to tell you that I want to understand what you were teaching, and I want you to try to explain it to the simple-minded person like me, okay? So you began with a beautiful midrash on the opening of Breshit, Pnei HaTahom, the murmuring deep, and Aviva Zornberg's beautiful commentary that there's this sound, this sort of hum of the universe that God quiets in order to create space. And you talked about cultivating space for the divine. So here's the beginning of my question, and you'll see where I'm trying to go. So I want to understand what you mean by that. Is the space God, or is the space a space for God to enter into? And if the space is not God, but the space is a way for God to enter into, what's this God who's entering into?
Yes.
And does God always enter into? Or is it possible for me to try to create space and, like a bad date, sit there, stood up, waiting for God to show up, and God didn't show up? I want to understand this, because I'm a practical kind of guy, so I want to understand, what is this God you're making space for? Who is this God?
Yeah,
is
thank
this
you.
A personal
Great
God?
question.
Is this a force, a feeling?
Yes.
How do you know if God's there?
Yes.
Help me understand that.
Yes, it's great questions. And not simple at all, as you know. But what I think I tried to convey when I was talking, but I think that when I was sharing about my experience of the treatment, that it wasn't that I don't experience God as a embodied, God's not a person, not anthropomorphized. That to me, God is presence, energy, force. All those Kaplanian terms really work for me. Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan. That God is a force, a presence. And so when I am making space, it is to allow the presence that is always there just to be more felt by me in my, less, I'm a human, So I need to consciously make room for the divine that's always there. Like, there's another way of saying it and just say, well, I'm constantly aware of God's presence. I don't have a sense that God comes and goes. God's presence is always here, always. And that this making of a space brings more awareness of God's presence.
How do you know? I'm trying to, how do you know, what is this presence you're talking about? How does one sense it? Okay, we've spent the evening together, we had supper and been talking. I have a sense of Susan's presence, a sense of my friend, my teacher, Hillel's presence. And when Hillel goes home, I'll have his sense of his absence, as I will of yours. Tell me what you feel when you feel God's presence.
Yes, I think that idea of kavod being having weight to it, a weightiness, not in terms of heavy, but in terms of having it literally being a presence that feels tangible to me. I can express how it feels to me, but I also know that it feels different to different people. So I don't want to say that this is the definitive feel of God's presence and then make you feel like, well, if I don't feel that, then I'm not feeling God, because that's not how I want to express it. I know that part of what happens for me when I talk most clearly about my experience of God's presence is it gets into a lot of that mystical language that is negation language, such as it's everything and nothing. It's all things and no things. And that for me is my personal experience of it, but I know that people experience it in different ways, the presence of the divine.
My teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, was a great student of Mordechai Kaplan's. And if he were here now, you would see a big grimace on his face. In fact, I can feel his presence, and I know, because I can feel him going, come on, ask her the question. So Harold would say, I mean, in his very inimical, philosophical, and eminently courtly, polite way, he would say, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Look, I also have an experience of cancer, and I also know that elevator ride. In my clinic, it was an elevator up, not an elevator down. And I know what it means to walk into that clinic, and I know what it means to have an angel who's dressed as a nurse hold my hand as I got violently sick from the medicine and never judge me and never tell me that I'm weak and always encourage me and always push me to the next one. And I could say that that's a sacred experience, but I don't. But is that the God you feel there, or is that an experience of human kindness? What's the difference? I want you to be. I'm sorry to be again simple-minded, but I want to understand this more. Yes. Please help me. Help me understand.
I do think that the extreme experiences of the midot, the qualities that are most elevated within our tradition of chesed, of shalom, when those are experienced fully, that there is divinity in that. Absolutely, I feel that in the presence of that nurse. Okay. I think that one of the things that I'm comfortable with is around different people experiencing God's presence in the way that works for them. As I said, my experience of it is what is most articulated by mystics. And that does lead someone, especially people who don't have mystical experience, to say, I don't know what you're talking about. The experience where the self leaves and there's only all. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to experience it that way for it to be the divine, but that's how I do. That's what the place looks like for me, or so it feels like.
You talked about cultivating.
Yes.
An openness, and you talked about the use of spiritual practice.
Yes.
And you led us through this breathing exercise. So tell us more about what is spiritual practice?
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does it look like?
Yeah. Well, a spiritual practice can look like a lot of things. In Judaism, it looks like prayer. For people who have a tefillah practice, a davening practice, that's a spiritual practice. For some people who take a line of tefillah or a line of psalms and do them as a chanting could be a spiritual practice. You know, what's his name? Varun Sunni, who is at USC, talks about how underappreciated spiritual genius is. He talks about spiritual genius and spiritual as a form of intellect. And that, especially in universities, they celebrate intellectual achievement, but there isn't a framework to talk about spiritual achievement. And especially in certain Western countries. And it's a practice like any others that meditation is a spiritual practice. Doing a meditative practice takes commitment, and people who commit to it reap the growing of spiritual skills that only come from practice. It's like anything else. You become a better musician when you do what they call shedding, and you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth over the guitar to get where you're going. And if you don't commit to spiritual practice, a lot of people then say, oh, I'm showing up in temple, but I don't feel anything. That rabbi must be terrible because he's not making me feel anything. Or I went to the high holidays and everybody talks about it being so spiritual, but nothing happened to me. And that is not how I see the experience of being a part of Jewish community. Each of us is responsible for doing the work, the spiritual work, the mindful work of prayer, of meditation, of study. Study can definitely be a form of worship. And to commit to it so that when you come to temple, you are available for something to happen to you. Rather than saying, I'm going to sit in this chair and you better make something happen inside of me. Which is a setup, right, for rabbis, and especially, I don't know, but I think maybe more in Reform traditions where people don't have so much of their own personal prayer practices, davening practices. When they do come, they do expect often that the person leading the service is going to provide that entirely for you without you being responsible for your own experience, not just when you're in the temple, but all through the week.
So what do you do for high holidays?
What do I do?
Yeah, most people show up to high holidays with that attitude.
Yeah.
And
how do you do it differently?
And it really is. And they come and they say, "Okay, Rabbi,
do it for me.
I'm here for an hour.
Do it to me.
Yeah.
Make something happen." Yeah. I think it has to start before. It has to start. We have all of Elul. We have from Tisha B'Av, we start a 7-week journey. I mean, you could go back and back. But even if you haven't done any preparation, like one of the things that I tell people is as you're davening on the high holy days, if it's Yom Kippur and there's one line of prayer, or prayers that are poems, or poetry that the rabbis put together into these prayer books, if one line of this poem hits you, then just stay there. Stay there for the whole service. Maybe repeat that one line to yourself. Hold it. Move it around your body. Think about it. See what it does for you. It's much better to get one thing than to get nothing by looking at a whole bunch of things. You can always show up and be present and decide in that moment, I'm going to get something from this experience. And it could be something, some dynamic that's happening in the room by being present with the people sitting next to you. There's so many things that can be happening to us if we show up than just waiting for the prayer leaders to make something happen to us.
So let me expand that question. We have a faith, a religious tradition that has so many set traditions, set practices, mitzvot, ways of doing things, rituals rules, regulations, words, customs, ceremonies, the whole. How do you understand those? What's the purpose of all that stuff?
What's the purpose of all of that?
Yeah, and how, given this notion that what you said, which is the task is to cultivate inner openness. I mean, I always find it kind of odd. If the task is to cultivate inner openness, I hand you an 800-page machzor on the high holidays.
Right.
And say, you know, here, find openness. You know, it's like,
Well, I think that for the rabbis, this was a guide.
okay.
I think the machzor is a guidebook.
Okay.
They put it together as a guidebook. And it's such, especially on the high holidays, I mean, the poetry, this idea of the book that we're being inscribed in, I mean, that is so beautiful as a challenging metaphor, right? As a guide to go deeper, right? That title of Rabbi Alan Liu of Blessed Memories' book, This is Real and You're Completely Unprepared, where if you haven't read that in preparation for the high holidays this year, I would really recommend it. This is Real and You're Completely Unprepared for it, or something like this is the title of his book, is about that idea of showing up. Like, we're never going to be ready. They do everything they can to raise the stakes, right? Don't eat, take the life force out of us. Don't eat, don't drink, don't have sex. Like, be connected to our mortality. Think about mortality when the book, with this metaphor of the book and everything being written. I mean, they do everything to push us to the edge, to ask us to do the deep thinking about who we are so that we can be a better person, because that's the point of all of it, is to be better people. And the encounter at Sinai, the point of that Levinas piece is that that's the root of the ethics, that the divine encounter then leads to all the mitzvot and all of the instructions we get in Torah. The divine encounter then leads us to saying, now how do we do it? Now for them it's like if your neighbor's donkey is having too heavy of a burden, right? Help it out. Now, that's not our list of things. We have other list of things. But the encounter is to try and push you towards the good. And that's what all of us is supposed to be. It's supposed to make us better people. It's supposed to make our world better. Or else why do any of it? I do it because I fully believe that the practices of our tradition does make us better human beings and makes us a stronger community and helps us to take care of others.
You're also very involved in issues of social justice, and
yes.
working for social justice. So help us understand the relationship between your commitment to social justice and this commitment to cultivate the inner space.
Yeah, because it's that same piece, that experience of infinity, that experience of transcendence, that is the divine encounter, is that step before then what? Before then what? It's the doing good. Those things can't be separated. When we're connected to the divine encounter, we want to do good for people. And when you see a human suffering, you catch the baby. There's no thought. You catch the baby. When somebody is suffering, you make it better. That is the point of the encounter at Sinai, is to then lead us to that.
So, but what's the difference between a social justice that's motivated and tempered and mediated by a spirituality, and a social justice that's a completely secular social justice? Is a religious social justice or a spiritually based social justice different action or initiative or impulse different than a secular kind of based one?
I feel in the end, if two people are helping somebody get off the ground who's suffering, then in the end, that's the important part. Okay. Like, what you believe about why you're doing it is less important than the person who's suffering or arguing about whether it's spiritual or not spiritual. The most important part is that you help the person up. But I personally, having been exposed as a child to secular social justice work and now being involved in interfaith social justice work, it does feel different to me. It does have a different quality of presence in my participation, and even just specific actions or in walking through it, it feels different. And as a child, seeing, at the time, it was mostly Catholic priests and nuns taking political action to try and stop the war in El Salvador when their fellow Jesuit priests were being murdered. My experience as a child was one that deeply affected me, because I was there with the secular social justice people, and I remember always being so moved by watching the people of faith engage in social justice and the prayer and the mindful commitment, and that it felt to me, and as I experience it, it still does, different on the inside of the people doing the political work, the social justice work. Again, everybody's helping those that suffer. That's the important part. And for how I want to be in the world, it is different when it's grounded in this practice of being connected with the divine.
So let me ask the question upside down for just a moment. Tell me how you understand evil. Tell you how I understand either social evil or personal evil.
Yeah. Well, I understand that it exists. I understand that there is this. I have at different points moved from an understanding of it being that it is a twisted good, a good that becomes twisted, or that there is potentially an opposing force. Right now, lately, I've been more in the twisted good, a force that was meant to be good that gets twisted.
And how do you untwist it?
Well, it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
I'm not a pacifist, so if somebody is doing something evil to another and you have to enter in with force, then sometimes you need force. Ideally, you change things by how people are raised, the kind of empathy and love they get experienced too as a child then affects how they are raised and who they become in the world. We change systems that, based on race and poverty, affect how people's lives go. We change a system to be a more just and loving system so that less acts of evil happen. I'm not going to say none, but I do think that changing our society untwists it.
I get us. I have one more question, then I just can't resist. I have a sense among some of the people that I know who are, like yourself, so very deeply committed to visions of social justice, particularly visions of social justice that are motivated by spiritual life, that they're giving up.
Giving up?
They're giving up. They're saying, you know what? They won. Let's move to the forests of Oregon and give it up. You know, like the fight isn't worth the fight anymore. There's a deep growing sense of despair.
Yes, there is despair.
A darkness, a despair. I don't know if you know this, but the president gave a big speech yesterday.
Did he?
And, you know, there's just this sense of despair among certain people in the community who believe in things that are obviously different than
yeah, I don't feel despair.
I
feel
know you
hopeful.
don't, but here's what I want. What do you say to them? I want your sermon.
Yeah, okay.
What do you say to those people who say, Susan, it's too hard, it's not working, we're not winning, it's killing me, I'm moving to the forests of Oregon, I'm going to live in a tree, let somebody else worry about it?
Yeah, two things. First of all, on the hope for the world, I'm messianic. I believe that the Messiah is coming and it's going to be a better world, and that a part of what we have to do is to encourage the coming of the Messiah. And a lot of non-Orthodox Jewish people don't talk about the Messiah, but I do, because I am ready for a new world. And I haven't said this earlier, but I tend to say it every time I talk. If you are here and you're ready to let yourself be known. I hear that the rabbi just shared that things are really bleak, so that might mean that it's a good time for you to let yourself be known to us. But in any case, because if we don't ask, how do we know? But I do believe that we have a role to play in bringing a new and better world. So that's partly why I don't ever lose hope, because I know it's coming. And in particular, in this moment, I think that something really incredible is happening. Yes, there's despair. That's not the good part. But there are people taking more responsibility about how they want their lives to be and how they want this world to be in ways that we have not seen. Do you see all the people who are like saying, I can run for office? It's like, really? I mean, some of the people probably shouldn't run for office, but just the fact that people have this sort of like empowered sense of like, I've got to do something. And before, that was not the feeling. People were like, well, whatever's going on in those halls of government, we'll just let them do it. People pay so much attention to the news right now. Like, I think too much attention. And people are shocked when they tell me something. I'm like, well, I actually haven't heard that yet, because I make real mindful choices about how much news I consume and when. And I don't do it all day, every day. And that's something people might want to think about because of the long haul and the desperation that people, I think, are feeling. I think people are overdoing it, like with the new, like they need to know every single moment of every investigation. Well, I mean, there's plenty of time to catch up. And what people need to do is also replenish our souls. You don't have to go to the forests of Oregon to replenish your soul, but you can go to Griffith Park, my neighborhood, or you can spend time with a kid who could really use some support, or an adult who needs some help. Those acts of doing, making the world better in the ways that we can in our lives, that's how you combat the overwhelm and the hopelessness that some people are feeling. It's just that I don't ever believe that we are without hope. And in the darkest times, that's when something good is being planted. Right now, I definitely feel that.
Well, thank you. That was great. Let's take a few moments and answer questions. Our tradition is we pass a microphone around. If you get the mic, you get to ask a question. And to remind you once again, the definition of a question is a single sentence interrogatory that begins with the words what, when, why, where, and how, and then asks our guests to respond at length. So please refrain from giving sermons. That's my job. Okay? Yes, please.
Don't get frightened, Rabbi. It starts with a statement.
A statement?
We went to see a film at the Laemmle this afternoon about what went on in Warsaw from 1940 to 1945. And I've always thought that the righteous Gentiles are an extraordinary group of people. And I want to ask you, do they represent the kind of thing you're talking about? People who are so infused with the Spirit, they can't do anything but the right thing. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Because your experience of righteous Gentiles is that what you're saying in that comment? You're saying that for you, a righteous Gentile who risked their lives to help the Jewish people during that time was so much the embodiment of good. Yeah, absolutely.
Howard.
She was talking about the movie that's so wonderful that we should all see, which is Who Will Write Our History? And that's playing at the Laemmle's, and it's about the Warsaw ghetto. And there was a group of journalists who decided they could escape, but they're going to stay there to make sure that everything is written down so that we will write our history, not the Germans. And they hid 60,000 papers in containers under different buildings, which have been turned out, which they found.
Milk cans, right? They're hidden in milk cans.
Right.
Buried underneath the Warsaw ghetto. And we found most of them now.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a very good movie. My question is, when you showed empathy for your son who came home and said the teacher
Yes.
didn't tell us about the test, okay, but when do you, showing him empathy and saying, I feel for you and I understand what you're saying, and it must have been awful, but when do you say to him, you should be prepared for a test at any moment? And were you prepared, and how did you do? When do you go into that, and how much longer after that?
Yeah. Do you want to know the exact time?
Yes.
Yeah, empathy is a stepping stone to the next steps. Empathy is a stepping stone, but it does usually change then how the conversation goes next, right? Once you feel felt, then the conversation goes, so tell me a little bit more about how this happened. Is there anything that you could have done to prepare for this? That's really different than leading with the, how could you have messed this up so badly? Right? I mean, empathy then changes how the course of the conversation goes, which means it affects the fabric of the relationship. No, you feel it. You'll feel it. You're in the empathy. You're staying with it. The person's body language usually changes because they feel like you've heard them. And then you could say, can I ask you a couple of questions about how this happened today? Yeah.
It avoids the impulses to point the finger and say,
Yes.
you screwed up, right? And what that does is that it poisons anything that comes after that, right? So instead of doing that, if you start by saying, all right, I feel you, and I feel your frustration, and I feel the hurt, and I know what that's like, let me give you a hug, have a Twinkie, and a glass of milk.
No Twinkies.
Now let's talk about how can we make sure this doesn't happen the next time. And
Kale. I make a really good kale chip.
If God wanted us to have kale, God would not have given us Twinkies.
That's the twisting of the good right there.
That is making room for the divine. You can attack my theology, but if you attack my culinary arts, you're getting into something first. Who's got the microphone? That was Pop.
When you see the divine, what image comes to your mind?
Great question.
That's a beautiful question. I think that
That's my dad, by the way.
Yeah. The divine for me, as a kinesthetic person, different people are different. I'm a kinesthetic person, so for me it goes straight to an experience of my body. But if I would say an image, it would sort of be a wash of color. A wash of color. Different color.
Good. Okay. Who's got the mic, Stephen?
Yeah, Rabbi, the only time the Judaism says don't lose hope, and I was losing it when Israel was so unfairly beat up. And one of the things that scares me is a line that I think over the last couple of years is an anti-Zionist line, and that is the line, social justice. I know what the true meaning is, but I've heard it used so often against Israel by people who are, quote, doing social justice. Your words on that, please.
Oh, that's a big conflation to say social justice is only about Israel. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have not experienced it that way, but I hear you. I hear you.
Who's got the mic, please? Yes, please, Mark.
We have a God in Exodus, loud like thunder, fearful as lightning, who saved the Israelites from Pharaoh's charioteers. Then in the 40s, we have a God who watches 6 million innocent Jews, his people, turn to ash. Is the God of the Torah the same as the God of the Holocaust, or how are they different?
It's a beautiful question. As I started this saying the multiple theologies of Judaism, the biblical theology is one theology of the God that acts in history and punishes and saves in that direct way. That's not a theology that I believe in. We have a puppet master working in history. I don't know post-Holocaust how you can have that theology. Certainly Yitz Greenberg, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who talks about especially the Deuteronomic theology, that if you do this, then you will be punished, and if you do this, you will be blessed, that we have to let go of that post-Holocaust, because there is simply no way that I would be talking about a relationship with God if my understanding of God was one that manipulates history and made some sort of decision to stand idly by as people were being murdered. Not just then, right now, everywhere, all the time. So my God does not, and my experience of God is not deciding where I get my parking space, who lives, who dies. That's not my experience of the divine. And what's so interesting to me, I bet you get this too, because a lot of rabbis do. I'll be at like social events, and people are like, oh, I heard you're a rabbi. I don't believe in God. And I'll be like, hi, nice to meet you. Okay, thanks for telling me. And then I'll say, it's nice to meet you, whatever your name is. Nice to meet you. I don't know what you mean. Because I don't know what you mean by believe, and I have no idea what you mean by God. And so then people usually tend to describe the biblical God, right, who acts in history and is punishing and decides if you get a parking space or if your cousin gets cancer. And I say, I don't believe in that God either, if that's what you're describing, but I do believe in God and have a relationship with God. I think that the rabbis really stressed relationship. I think the paradigm of belief is more of a Christian belief, Christian paradigm, but we could talk about that. I think for us it's relationship. And so that usually begins a conversation where somebody thought that they were just putting something out to end the conversation. I don't believe, right? And so then people then have to explore what it is that they're talking about. And usually it is that biblical theology. And they haven't thought about the fact that there could be a relationship with the divine. That's not that. The other thing that I find is fascinating is when people say, I don't believe in God. How could God have done this to me? Right? In the same sentence. Or how could God have done this to my friend or my parent or my sister or whatever? So it's sort of that. Most people think about, that's why I'm so glad you're doing this class, because most people think about theology until they decide they don't believe, and then they're out, right? And that's usually, and so when people start to talk about it again, they sound like they're 8 years old, or maybe 13 or 14, maybe 16, but they haven't given it much thought since. And so they'll say these contradictory things, like, I don't believe in God at all. I'm so mad at God for doing that. And you're sort of like, well, I thought you don't believe, right? So having the opportunity to articulate what your theology is so important. And I really commend all of you for doing that here.
Do you think it takes religion to have morality in the world, or do you think the world could be moral without religion?
Oh, I love that question. This is the question of my house. Because my husband has a different experience of all of this than I do. He would say emphatically, yes, you can have morality without religion. And I don't know. It depends then how we're defining religion. If we're defining religion as ways that people, again, and religion is also, it was a term coined by Christianity, so we have to define what we're talking about by religion. But I think part of the whole point of it is people organizing themselves to get clear about the relationship with the divine in order to lead a certain life that leads to kindness, peace, justice, these things, right, that are a part of religion. And so we would have to get in the weeds, which is what we do, about is it just innate, Or, in my opinion, there has to be a conscious effort to also define what it is that a community wants to be. Now, you don't have to call that religion. You could call it a conscious effort to define what community wants to be. But I think it's a slippery slope when you get into terms of which so yes, I think there has to be some organized thing that helps support moral action. But I don't think that if you're an atheist that you are amoral. I'll say that too.
Let me try my hand at this one, okay? You ever go to the mall looking for a shop? And there's a stanchion near the entrance that's a big map of the mall. Shows you where all the stores are in the mall. And it has this big red spot, and it says, "You are here."
Yeah.
Right? That's religion. It is your map of the universe and your location in it and a direction to get to where you want to get to. Everyone has religion in the sense that everyone has a map of the universe that tells them, it orients them in the universe, that directs them to the things that they value, that helps them figure out which direction to go, this one and not that one. Okay? Everyone has in that sense, it's not that, religion, yes, religion, no, everyone's got a map. The question is, which map are you working off of, right? There are people who are conscious of their maps and people who never stop to think that I'm on a map, that I'm following Yellow Brick Road.
But does there have to be some sort of divine aspect to that map?
Divine is part of the map. Do I believe, how big is my map? What are the boundaries and borders of my map? Is my map just my own little experience in Encino and Tarzana? Or do I have the courage to include Van Nuys and Reseda?
But his question is about morality.
I heard what you said.
Yeah.
Do I have the courage? Do I say that my map is just my own temporal frame? The few years I live on this planet? Does my map include my parents and my children and my grandparents and my grandchildren? How big is my map? And what are the contours and boundaries of the map? That's the great question. So to say, for example, that part of my map is a divine presence means it's a much bigger map than I had thought about it before. That it has a bigger time frame and a bigger spatial frame. Who else is on this map? What is my relationship to these other people? How do I relate to these other people? What is my, as Levinas points out, what is my responsibility vis-a-vis these other human beings? Are they just bystanders? Are they just people in the way? Are they people that I have to get around in order to get to the place I want to get to? Or is my map, do I have a sense that my job in life is to help them find the shops they're looking for? I mean, so this becomes a question. And morality grows out of my map. And my map supports or defeats different kinds of moralities. And one of the simple moral questions is this one. You all give charity? You should give more to the rabbi's discretionary fund. You all give charity, right? One of the things you do if you give charity, if you're smart, is you look up the charity online to make sure that the money you're giving actually goes to do what you says it's going to do. If they're going to use this money to cure cancer, they're going to use this money to clean beaches, they're going to use this money to feed hungry kids. If you found out that 90% of your contribution went to administrative costs and only 10% went to cure cancer, you wouldn't give money to that charity. It'd be kind of silly to give money to that charity, right? Okay? You give money because you have the idea that by giving money to this charity, you're going to cure cancer, clean beaches, and feed hungry people. So let me ask you a hard question. How do you know that that's even possible? How do you know that there isn't a constant amount of pain and suffering in the world? Suppose I told you that there's a constant amount of pain and suffering in the world. So if you cure something over here, it's just going to rise up over there. We had tuberculosis, and we cured tuberculosis. Then there was polio, and we cured polio. Then there was cancer. We haven't cured that one yet. Then there was AIDS. We figured that one out. Then there was Ebola. You figured that one out, and there'll be another one. How do you know there isn't a constant amount of suffering in the world at any one particular moment? But you give charity. So you believe that the world's suffering can be ameliorated.
Yes.
You believe that. You can't prove that empirically. That's a map. You carry a map that says, I think if I feed a hungry child, it's going to make the world qualitatively better. That is a faith statement. That's part of your map. Everyone who gives charity makes a faith statement. Anyone here have children or grandchildren? That's the greatest faith statement you can make. How do you know you haven't brought your children into a holy hell of suffering? Look, I have friends who are Holocaust survivors who refused to have kids. And others who had kids but refused to tell them they were Jewish. Because they believed that if I told my kid he's Jewish, then he'll have to go through the holy hell that I went through, and I escaped, and I don't want my kid. The fact that you tell your kid he's Jewish, you brought a kid into this world and then told him he's Jewish, what a ridiculously wild, crazy, and in some ways outrageously radical statement of faith. So I believe that everyone's got a map, and the question is, what map are you carrying, right? And that's a really interesting question when you're arguing with somebody and they're telling you that your politics are all upside down. Stop and ask yourself, what map is he carrying, and what map am I carrying, and how are our maps different? Okay, that would be my answer. So yes, it's not that do you have morality, do you need religion for morality? Everyone's got religion. It's a question of which religion do you got? Which one are you holding on to? What's your orientation to the universe, and what kind of behavioral consequences flow from that? How's that? Not bad, huh? I'm not even the guest tonight. I'm just the moderator. Who's got the mic? We're going to finish in another minute because it's ice cream time. Go ahead. It may be 42 degrees outside. That's why you put hot fudge on your ice cream. This will be our last question. Gil, you get the last question tonight. And then Rabbi Goldberg said she had a wonderful ending which she forgot to give us, so we're going to have her give it.
Don't build it up.
No, it's great. Doctor, please.
I'm just curious, going back to the beginning, and talking about the universe, I'm amazed to see that the same. I'm going back to the beginning and talking about the universe. I'm amazed to see that some of the similar terminology that is used in like astrophysics is used like from Genesis. And how do you place the singularity which they talk about, which there is no exit of light, and where this is all supposed to have begun before the Big Bang, and then there were stars and light, and then this whole idea of what you called it, the murmuring deep, or that there was silence there. And if there is a singularity, is that what we're talking about in terms of God, and or what came before the singularity from the standpoint of Judaism, or was there anything?
Yes.
Easy questions.
Yes. This is what we spend centuries talking about, those very questions. What was before the nothing? What was the something before the nothing? I hope that we'll keep talking about that for centuries. It's evocative, it's poetic, and that to me is what a lot of what this is in these texts, these narratives, is to evoke the poetic and for us to imagine. It's not for me a guidebook that's supposed to line up exactly with scientific theory about the Big Bang. It's nice that there's some overlap, but it's not what the point of Torah is. I think there was something before the nothing, and imagining what that is, and can take you in all sorts of directions. You can go through Lurianic Kabbalah and hear about the contracting that seemed soon before there was then the something. There's all kinds of ways that our people have tried to understand that very gorgeous Bereshit, that in the beginnings. Just even that one word, right? What that meant. I'm not gonna give you a way out of all the wonderful exploring about it. I hope that for the rest of your lifetime you can explore that one or two or three verses.
Give us your ending.
You're gonna be like, building it up like that.
No, I'm sorry.
I'll say that also in your text that's supposed to be Exodus 24:3, so you can check that out in your Tanakh that I'm sure you have at home, that you didn't, rather than Genesis, on the backside. So what I was going to end with is that when do we say hamakom the most in terms of what we say to each other, and that is after a loss. Right? Hamakom yenachem etchem. That the place will comfort you amongst all those who mourn. So my hope, my wish, my blessing for each of you is that you can feel that presence as source of comfort, as source of joy, as source of hope and inspiration. And thank you for your presence tonight.
Thank you so much. Can I before you go, I want to ask one. Can I just ask one more question?
One more question.
No. This is off the. Rabbi Goldberg, before she became Rabbi Goldberg, was a professional dancer.
I was.
And choreographer, and still is a dancer.
Yeah. How can you stop it?
Well, no, but here's my question, and I want you to help us with this. Most people who engage Judaism have bodies.
Yes.
But the Jewish tradition, at least the way we practice it, forgets that because it makes us grossly sedentary.
Yes.
Right? You come to Shul Yontif, and I make you sit for 3.5 hours.
Oh, mean guy.
Sometimes I make you stand up. Sometimes you bow. Sometimes you move like a half a step back and a half a step forward.
Yes.
So from your dancer's heart, what can you do about this? How can you bring back an embodied Judaism?
Oh, this is a lot of what I do. You could imagine with just trying to model it in the breathing that we did together.
Right.
That there are opportunities that you do not have to sit for 3 hours. First of all, there's permission there. You can get up, you can move around. You can jump up and down.
Not in our shul, no.
Yes, you can. You absolutely can, and you should, because you should model that for other people, that they can be aware of their body. Come to Nefesh, first and third Fridays. You can see us jumping around and singing and moving, and the invitation to take it in with our full bodies. Part of it is about being bold and knowing that, okay, like not everybody's doing that right now, but I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to focus on my breath. And I'm going to change my posture and how I'm sitting, even just changing how you're sitting. You're sitting for 3 hours. Literally, you can.
Right, everybody sit up. Everybody sit up.
You can move to the front of
sit
your
up.
chair.
Hands in your
you
lap.
can move to
Hands
the
in your lap.
back of
Take
your
a
hair.
big deep breath.
You can move your shoulders while you're sitting in the service. You can be aware that your spine has motion. There is so much motion you can do in the chair, right? You could go forward and back. You could go side to side while you're sitting down. You can even do circles while you're sitting down. There is no reason to just sit absolutely still for 3 hours.
There you go. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg. Thank you, everyone. So very kind. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
It was almost everything that you and I said today was very reminiscent of the conversation.
Hi, Jude.
So entertained and intrigued and fascinated.
When you, I'm sorry.
When I'm counseling.
Yeah.